I stood by him through everything: the layoffs, the surgeries, the brilliant ideas that left us broke and barely hanging on. I was the one keeping things together while he figured himself out, paying bills late but paying them, cooking meals from scraps, holding his hand when he didn't believe in himself. I never wanted a medal. I just believed that love meant staying, even when things got hard. So when he got the promotion, I was genuinely proud. We popped a cheap bottle of champagne in the kitchen, and I watched him smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. He looked alive again. I hugged him so tightly that night, thinking, finally, we made it. And for a little while, it actually felt like we had. Like the storm had passed, and the sun was finally ours. But something started to shift. He swapped his wrinkled shirts for tailored ones, stopped inviting me to after-work dinners, started correcting the way I spoke in front of his colleagues. He'd laugh and brush it off, say I was being sensitive, but the jabs kept coming. They were small at first, subtle, but they stung. They chipped away at something I couldn't quite name yet. One night, as I was folding his laundry, he walked in and said, "It must be nice not having to worry about real responsibilities." Just like that. No context, no warning. I froze, my hands clenched around his favorite shirt. I wanted to say something, anything, but I just stood there trying to understand how the man I held through his worst could look at me like I was somehow less now. It didn't stop there. Suddenly, everything about me was wrong. The way I dressed, the way I filled the silence at dinner, even the way I decorated the house. "This place feels stuck in the past," he muttered one evening, sipping imported whiskey he never used to buy. I stared at the walls I had painted, the curtains I had sewn. Every inch of that house had my fingerprints on it, and now it was all beneath him. I started to shrink in his presence without meaning to. I second-guessed my words, waited for his approval before making any small decision, even dinner. And he noticed. Not to comfort me. No, he seemed to enjoy it. Like my hesitation proved him right, made him bigger. I was no longer his partner. I was furniture, useful, silent, easy to ignore. I tried. I really did. I asked if he was okay. If the stress at work was changing him, if I'd done something to push him away. But every time I opened that door, he slammed it shut with sarcasm or a scoff. "Don't be dramatic, Brenda," he'd say, eyes already on his phone. He wasn't interested in repair. He was rewriting the story. And in his version, I was the dead weight. The worst part? I started to believe it. Not all at once, but little by little, I found myself apologizing for existing too loudly. I'd flinch at his sighs, rush to clean something just so he wouldn't make a comment. And through it all, I kept hoping the man I loved would come back. The man who once looked at me like I was his whole world. But I was starting to realize, maybe that man only existed when he needed saving. There was a night, late, quiet, when I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in hand, just staring. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked tired. Not just physically, soul-tired, like someone who'd been slowly erased. I used to be so full of life, of ideas, of laughter that came from somewhere deep. Now, even my silence felt heavy. That same week, he joked to a coworker on speakerphone, "Brenda? Oh, she's great at folding laundry and watching daytime TV." They both laughed. I didn't say a word. I just walked into the kitchen and started boiling water for tea. Because when you live with someone who's erasing you, even your anger gets folded into silence. I started noticing how the world treated him differently now, with respect, admiration, even envy. They didn't see the man who used to cry in my arms when he thought he'd failed. They didn't see the mornings I spent drafting his resume, rewriting his emails, hyping him up like a coach before a big game. They only saw the polished version, the one standing tall, while I disappeared in his shadow, and maybe that was the moment I really felt it. He hadn't just changed. He had climbed one step up and decided I wasn't worth bringing with him. Not because I wasn't enough, but because to him, I had served my purpose. And now, I was simply in the way. It started with the little things, like the way he'd hand me his plate without a word, or leave his dirty laundry in the middle of the hallway like it was someone else's job to pick it up. and that someone was always me. I'd become his maid, his secretary, his ghost. He stopped saying please or thank you, like those words were too expensive now. Respect had become a luxury he no longer offered me. Then came the jabs in public. At dinners with his new friends from work, people who wore tailored suits and laughed a little too loudly, he'd make jokes at my expense. "Brenda's still holding down the fort, or holding onto the couch," he'd grin, while their eyes flickered to me with pity or discomfort. I'd smile, numbly, like I was in on the joke. But inside, something small cracked each time. I tried to talk to him once, just us two. Told him I felt invisible, that I missed who we used to be. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "You're just bored," he said flatly. "You should take a yoga class or something." Like I was a houseplant that needed a little more sun. Not a wife, not a partner, just a background character in his rising star movie. And then came the real sting. We were arguing. I don't even remember what started it. But his face twisted, cold and cruel, and he snapped, "You're a weight around my neck." I froze, not because of the words, but because of how easily they came, like he'd been waiting to say them, like he meant them more than anything he'd said in months. After that night, something shifted in me. Not dramatically. I didn't pack a bag or scream in the rain, but it was like a light went out, quietly, in a room I used to live in. I stopped waiting for him to change, stopped rehearsing the perfect sentence that might make him remember us. Instead, I started watching him, really watching, and I realized he didn't see me at all anymore. Just someone to bark orders at, someone who existed to not interrupt his rise. He started locking his phone, spending more time at work, coming home with that air of untouchable confidence, like the world owed him something. And when he did talk to me, it was mostly to complain about the noise, the bills, the smell of dinner, like everything I touched turned into a disappointment. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop, something polished and quiet that clapped when he walked into the room. And yet, I kept trying. Maybe it was habit or hope, or just fear of what came next. I planned little surprises. His favorite dessert, a new tie, a handwritten note tucked into his briefcase. He never noticed. Or worse, he noticed and rolled his eyes like I was clinging, like kindness had become a burden. It's strange how silence can feel louder than screaming. And our house was screaming, with every unspoken resentment, every unmet glance, every door closed just a little too hard. There were moments I'd catch myself apologizing, for forgetting to record his show, for needing to talk, for existing in the same room when he needed quiet. And each time I said sorry, I hated myself a little more. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't the problem. I had simply stopped being useful to his narrative. I remember standing in our kitchen one morning, still in my robe, flipping pancakes the way he used to like them. He walked in, barely looked up from his phone, and said, "You should really do something with your life." That's what he said. No good morning, no thanks. Just a sentence that sliced clean through me. I wanted to ask, didn't holding him together count for something? Didn't surviving alongside him mean anything? I started replaying the years in my head like a movie with no audience. The nights spent calming his anxiety, the months scraping by on coupons while he figured things out. The sacrifices. My sacrifices. And now he stood there, with his perfect hair and curated smile, acting like he'd built his success in a vacuum, like I had been nothing but dead weight on his golden ladder. He stopped asking for my opinion, on anything. If I offered a thought about the news or his new office design, he'd wave me off. Or worse, say something like, "You wouldn't get it." As if intelligence was something he'd discovered recently, and I wasn't invited to the party. It wasn't just disrespect. It was erasure. And the man I once loved was now treating me like a shadow he couldn't wait to outrun. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And deep inside that silence, he mistook for surrender. Something else had started to grow. A seed of clarity. A flicker of remembering who I was before he needed saving. He thought I was fading. But in truth, I was only just beginning to wake up. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream or throw his clothes out the window. That's not how I leave. Instead, I started waking up earlier than him, making coffee, sitting in the quiet and planning. I opened a blank notebook and wrote one thing at the top. Get out without letting him know he pushed you. That became my compass. Every move, every decision, quietly pointed in that direction. I opened a bank account in my name only, transferred small amounts, nothing suspicious, just enough to breathe if I needed to run. I spoke with a lawyer during lunch breaks, under the pretense of volunteering. Every box of legal documents she handed me felt like a brick. Not of burden, but of foundation. For the first time in years, I was building something for me. Not for us, not for him, for me. I also started collecting proof. Voice recordings, texts, screenshots of the things he said when he thought no one would remember. I knew it wouldn't change the past, but it might protect my future. And the irony? He didn't notice. He was so consumed with his own reflection that he didn't realize I was no longer in the frame. I had become invisible to him, and I used that invisibility as a shield. Then, while looking for a tax form in our old office drawer, I found something unexpected. The draft. The one I'd written years ago, in his name, begging for that promotion he now paraded like it was divine right. I remembered staying up late, researching buzzwords, editing it with care. My words, my voice, his name. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just ungrateful. He was built from pieces I gave him. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, holding the printed letter in my hands like it was made of glass. The words were familiar. Mine. Yet it felt surreal to see them again. Unchanged. Still carrying the weight of love I no longer felt. Back then, I wrote it because I believed in him more than he did in himself. Now, all I could think was, if he knew the truth, it would burn his little empire to the ground. But I didn't rush. That wasn't the point. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was about reclaiming my narrative. For years, I'd been written out of my own story, edited into a side note. Now, every quiet move I made was a sentence in a new chapter. I stopped cooking dinner. I let the laundry pile up. I stopped apologizing for simply existing. And still, nothing. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he assumed I was just tired, not done. I started looking in mirrors again. Really looking. Practicing what it would feel like to smile without permission. I pulled old boxes from the closet, things I had tucked away, like my writing journals, my vision boards, that dusty yoga mat, pieces of myself I had once put on pause, and slowly I felt it, the return, like muscle memory, like finding your own name in the dark and daring to say it out loud. One afternoon, while he bragged over the phone about a project he'd pitched, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and reread the recommendation letter. I added a sticky note, written by Brenda, uncredited, just that, a reminder, a seed. Because I knew something he didn't. The house he was so proud of stood on the ground I built. And soon, he'd remember exactly where the cracks began. Every day after that, I lived like I had a secret. And I did. But it wasn't just about the letter anymore. It was about the woman I was becoming behind his back. I stopped reacting to his digs. I stopped waiting for tenderness that was never coming. Instead, I became a listener. I listened to how he spoke, what he prioritized, what image he worked so hard to keep spotless. It told me everything I needed to know, not just about him, but about where to strike. At work, his company was planning a big gala, something flashy to honor his so-called leadership. He bragged about it constantly, dropping names, rehearsing speeches. I smiled when he told me, but inside, I was already drafting a different kind of story. I started collecting timelines, receipts, copies of emails I'd sent in his name, building a quiet portfolio of truth. It was strange how easy it was. He never suspected. He never asked what I was up to, because in his mind I had no purpose beyond orbiting him. But I had stopped orbiting. I was charting my own course now, and every detail I uncovered felt like a breadcrumb leading me back to myself. Even the way I carried myself changed. Shoulders straighter, voice steadier. He didn't comment. He probably thought I was trying to impress him again. That's the thing about men like him. They assume your world begins and ends with their approval. He didn't realize I had already stepped outside of his. He thought I was invisible. A ghost. An afterthought fading into the background of his glow-up. But what he failed to see was that I was the one who made him seen in the first place. And soon, everyone else would see it too. The announcement came in a glossy email blast. Greg Holloway to be honored for excellence in leadership and innovation. There were headshots, quotes from executives, even a tagline. A self-made visionary. I stared at the screen and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the lie had gotten so big, so bloated, it was practically begging to be popped. And I knew exactly how to do it. With one click. I created a new email account with no name, no ties, just silence behind the keyboard. I attached the original draft of the letter, my letter, with annotations highlighting the dates, file metadata, writing samples. I wrote a brief, razor-sharp message to the company board. Before you celebrate integrity, you might want to know whose words actually built the pedestal. Then I hit send. No shaking hands, no second thoughts. But I didn't stop there. That same day, my lawyer filed the divorce papers, all of them. With every screenshot, audio clip, financial record I had tucked away like insurance. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about documentation, about truth. I wasn't burning the house down. I was opening the blinds and letting people see the mess he'd been hiding behind his perfect curtains. The night of the gala arrived like clockwork. He left in a sleek suit, his smile smug, his cologne thick in the hallway. He didn't kiss me goodbye. Didn't even ask if I was coming. And why would he? In his mind, I no longer existed. Just a shadow by the sink. What he didn't know was that by the time he arrived, the leak had already spread. Whispers had already begun. He walked into that ballroom expecting applause, expected to be the center of gravity in a room full of orbiting admiration. He didn't see it at first, the sidelong glances, the stiff smiles, the way people started whispering behind champagne glasses. But the shift was there, palpable, like a current of unease running beneath the clinking of forks and polite conversation. The email had done its job. My silence had finally spoken louder than his noise. Then came the moment, the part where he was meant to be introduced, handed a plaque, and praised for years of unmatched leadership. But the executive reading his intro hesitated, fumbled her notes. She glanced at someone off stage, eyes wide, voice faltering. The crowd murmured. Greg stepped forward, still smiling. But I know him. I know that twitch in his jaw, that blink too long. He was starting to realize something was off. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Can we confirm who actually authored the documents that led to this nomination? Her voice was calm, but her question detonated like a firework in a library. Greg stammered. He laughed, too loudly, tried to spin it into a joke. But the room wasn't laughing. They were watching, weighing. And just like that, the man who had built his castle on borrowed bricks was standing in a spotlight that suddenly felt far too bright. And me? I wasn't there. I was at home, in pajamas, with a glass of wine in one hand and a candle burning on the windowsill. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it. The collapse. The unraveling of a myth he had worked so hard to maintain. Without realizing, I had always been the scaffolding. The next day, his name was all over the office thread. Not in praise, but in damage control. HR emails, legal whispers, PR scrambling to review the situation thoroughly. They didn't mention me by name. They didn't have to. The receipts spoke louder. The timeline, the wording, the undeniable fingerprint of a woman who had been behind every polished version of him. He didn't just lose credibility. He lost the illusion that he'd built it alone. And as he tried to backpedal, to spin the story in his favor, he learned something that must have stung deeper than any headline. No one rushed to defend him. The same people he used to charm were suddenly silent, unwilling to get pulled under with him. His image, so carefully crafted, started to wilt in the heat of scrutiny. He wasn't a leader anymore. He was a question mark. When he finally got home that night, his face was pale, like all the blood had been drained from it. He didn't say a word, just dropped his keys in the bowl like always, but even that sounded hollow. I was sitting at the kitchen table, calm, unreadable. He looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in months. I held his gaze for just a second. then went back to reading my book. No drama, no speeches, just the weight of everything he thought he'd gotten away with, settling in. He once told me I was the weight around his neck, but what he didn't understand was that I had been the anchor keeping him steady. The minute he cut me loose, he didn't rise. He drifted until the tide turned and pulled him back down. And this time, there was no one left to save him. The house felt different after he left. Quieter, yes, but not empty. It felt spacious, like I could finally hear myself think. I started opening windows just to feel the breeze, rearranging furniture, repainting the walls. It wasn't about design, it was about reclaiming space. I donated his suits, threw out the cologne I used to pretend to like, and pulled my old journals from storage. For the first time in years, every inch of the space belonged to me. With the settlement finalized and my name finally mine again, I used part of the money to do something I dreamed of quietly for years. I launched a small consulting business. Nothing flashy, just me, a laptop, and the skills I had spent a lifetime sharpening behind the scenes. At first, it felt strange putting myself at the center of something, but then the clients came, slowly, steadily, and so did my confidence. I started getting messages, not just from clients, but from women I barely knew, friends of friends, former neighbors, women who had seen pieces of themselves in my quiet exit. They wanted to know how I did it, how I'd gone from invisible to independent, and instead of shrinking from that attention, I leaned in. Not for ego, but because I knew what it felt like to forget your own name while loving someone else's dream. So I said yes when a women's circle invited me to speak. And when a local magazine asked for an interview, I gave it. Not to shame him, not to retell the past, but to show that rebirth doesn't require rage. It just requires truth, and a willingness to write your story in your own handwriting, with no one else holding the pen. I didn't become famous overnight. That was never the goal. But little by little, my story spread. A podcast picked it up, then a blog, then a small feature on a talk show. And every time I shared, I didn't just talk about what I went through. I talked about what I found on the other side: self-trust, freedom, the kind of peace that doesn't beg to be validated. I wasn't telling a revenge story. I was telling a resurrection. And yet, I'd be lying if I said I never thought about him. Sometimes his name would pop up in industry news, smaller and smaller each time. Former VP now in advisory role. Translation: he'd been pushed aside. I heard whispers that no one really wanted to work with him anymore. Not because of me, necessarily, but because, without someone quietly holding him up, his shine didn't last. Turns out charisma without character is just noise. I never reached out, never gloated. What would be the point? He had taken the stage while I held the spotlight. Now, I had the stage, and I didn't need to dim anyone else to stand in it. That was the difference. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live. And it felt good. It felt honest. It felt earned. The best part? I started seeing it in other women too. They'd send emails saying, "I left him after your story," or "I'm finally going back to school," or just, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." And every time it landed in my chest like a soft thunder. I hadn't just reclaimed my voice. I had sparked something in others. And that was everything I never knew I needed. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw him again. Not in person, but on TV. I was backstage at a women's leadership conference, getting mic'd up for a panel. The green room had a muted television in the corner, and there he was, sitting in the audience of another man's event, clapping politely. No spotlight, no headlines, just another suit in the crowd. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing, like watching a distant character from a story I'd already finished. Then it was my turn. I walked on stage, lights warm on my face, applause ringing in my ears, and as I looked out at the sea of women, nodding, listening, seeing me, I felt the deepest kind of peace. I wasn't here because someone handed me a script. I was here because I wrote one built on truth, resilience, and every quiet moment I once mistook for weakness. People often ask if I ever regret those years with him, and I don't, because without that chapter, I wouldn't have found this voice. This clarity, this fire. I don't need to rewrite history. I just needed to reclaim my place in it. What he tried to discard became the foundation of everything I built. And in the end, I didn't just walk away. I rose. He thought I was nothing, that I'd fade into the background, unmissed and unmoved. But the truth is what the world sees now. A woman unbroken, unbothered, unstoppable. The woman he never truly saw, until it was too late.